那么就希望有一天我可以做第二个李小龙。
Then I tried to kick him. My kick just go to the halfway. He fit already on my face. Like that. I'm just like that.
Bruce Lee was untouchable.
Watching Kung Fu movies, having play fights, pretty much summarised my childhood. In most of his film portrayals, Bruce was often the underdog and always had to fight his way out of sticky situations. While they might appear as just classic good guy versus bad guy stories, metaphorically speaking, this reflected his own struggles in trying to fit in as an Asian American when at a time the silver screen was dominated by Western culture. Seeing a yellow man leading an act, Bruce was more of a symbol of power, progress, and possibility.
May it be well with you, Mike. My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee. I was born in San Francisco in 1940. I'm 24 right now.
In the decades after this interview, Bruce bridged the gap between Eastern and Western culture by bringing Chinese martial arts in front of the television. But you'd probably be surprised that it was in fact his philosophy which really resonated with people.
Well, Kung Fu, the best example would be a glass of water. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend.
Which is why it was particularly interesting when Bruce's brother, Robert Lee, said,
So why did Bruce get into Kung Fu and the martial arts?
Well, Bruce kind of grew up as a violent kid, and he was always involved in fights and things like that.
Fittingly, according to his mother, that's exactly the type of roles Bruce played as a child.
He used to play like a rascal.
Like the Little Rascals, the American Little Rascals?
Picking up martial arts wasn't for anything philosophical, but simply to exercise his dominance on the street. Always fighting and getting into trouble, Bruce was the classic rebel child you'd expect from an affluent middle-class family. Eventually, Bruce had so much beef with the police that he had to leave Hong Kong for the US. And that was the 1960s, marked by the History Channel as one of the most tumultuous and divisive decade in world history. After graduating from University of Washington with a degree in drama and philosophy, Bruce began teaching martial arts to make a living, continuing in honing his craft as well as learning from other schools. He wanted to break free from the limitations of styles and sought after the non-style as a style.
What is this thing you do?
In Cantonese, Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist.
Intercepting fist, huh?
Bruce Lee was the boxing champion, high school boxing champion in Hong Kong. He put in the boxing movements of Western boxing, took the kicks from different Chinese systems, and he started to play around with it.
Much like the fighting art that we're seeing today with minimal protection gear, Bruce's idea of mixing different styles has led to people considering Bruce as the spiritual father of MMA. And his non-discriminatory approach to styles has also trickled down to his approach in recruiting students.
Didn't delineate and say I'm only going to take so many blacks in or so many Chinese or anything like that. He just left it to who came in, and if they proved themselves to be of character, why, he let them in.
Unfortunately, this got Bruce a lot of hate. The 1964 Long Beach martial art tournament was pivotal for Bruce because this is the way he demonstrated one-inch punch, and also this is where he was discovered by a TV producer and scouted back into acting. For the first time, Western audience was seeing an Asian face being the star of the show.
Don't think, feel.
And what differentiates Bruce from many of the Kung Fu stars that we are seeing today is that there's always a philosophical message behind the roles that he played.
I do not hit. It hits all by itself.
Whenever I watch that, I get the feeling Bruce wasn't really acting. He was being himself. And Bruce Lee was so cool. Everybody wanted to be like him. I mean, even Mike Tyson.
I mean, like, if I were born, let's say, 40 years ago, if I have a thought in my mind, I said, boy, I'm gonna star in a movie or star in a television series in America. Well, that might be a vague dream, but I think right now, maybe, man.
The turbulent 60s was also hugely influenced by spirituality and Eastern philosophy. His kung fu fighting resonated with traditional masculinity-driven boomers, but his philosophy echoed with the hippies, and that makes him someone everybody can relate to.
Or don't hit back.
I myself do not hold any person or people responsible for his death. Fate has ways we cannot change. The only thing of importance is that Bruce is gone and will not return.
It is still unknown and heavily debated that how could a man with this kind of physical stature could die so young, so suddenly. But what we know for sure is that we're never going to see another Bruce Lee movie again. And that seems to have triggered a response in the popular culture. Bruce pinned a category of kung fu movies onto the Western cinema. While we might not see Bruce fighting baddies on the screen ever again, the fighting spirit is well and alive in the kung fu movies came thereafter.
You still think of yourself Chinese, or do you ever think of yourself as North American?
You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Because, I mean, I don't want to sound like, as Confucius say, but under the sky, under the heaven, man, there is but one family. It just so happened, man, that people are different.
To many, I think people saw beyond Bruce Lee's colour of skin, echoing his philosophy, under the heavens, there is but one family. We're all the same. We're all humans. In a time of increased division, gender issues, racism, the reminiscence of the Korean and the Pacific War, as well as the onset of the Vietnam War, Bruce fought to revamp the image of Asian portrayals on television, not necessarily making Asians superior, but to champion the equality for all races. Like many of these figures, they all represented something much larger than themselves. Their work gave them influence, but what they stood for, not to be cheesy, really captured our hearts. I guess that's why people love Bruce Lee so much.